Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here today. My name is Stephanie Tavares-Rance, and I'm the co-founder of the Academy-accredited Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival. And this is an installation that we love to do called The Color of Conversation. We have conversations that matter, that deal with and impact people of color. And I'm really, really excited about this wonderful group of panelists that we have for you guys today. You know, there's a lot going on in the Black community with COVID, with this pandemic, 200,000 people dying, the economy not doing well. You know, it really is a time for people of color, specifically Black and brown people, to come together, to pull our resources together and to make things happen. These three people that I have in my panel are doing exactly that and so much more. I am so excited to have you all hear them speak. We're going to have a great conversation, so let's get to it. First, I'd like to introduce Daryl Lester. Please, Daryl, tell us about yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here, be a part of this panel. I hail from, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I am a child of the South, born in Marion, South Carolina. And that has a lot of significance to how I look at giving in the Black community, because I grew up in one of those neighborhoods where people sacrifice time, talent, and resource to create a Daryl. You know, it wasn't just my parents. So that has been something that was ingrained in me since I was young. And so everybody in my neighborhood was expected, wherever you landed, that you needed to start thinking about how you sow something back to Marion, but how you sow where you are. And it's not about how much you have, but it's a sacrifice that you know you need to sow. And so I spend my time now at NC State University in the Institute for Emerging Issues, actually getting people to look at their time and talent in engaging in service. But while I'm not doing that, I'm still organizing individuals and groups who are thinking about trying to maximize their impact with their time, with their talent, and with their treasure. And so through that, it brings me in contact with a lot of folks. Spent a lot of time in what I call organizing institutional philanthropy, where LaDawn was. And while I sat there, I had a lot of questions around how they saw the narrative that included Black people in the giving. Was it just we were seen as receivers, or were we also givers? And so a lot of my work was, the platform for that was, I really wanted to reframe that narrative and introduce more people into what we would call giving from the ground. So I'm just glad to be a part of the conversation and looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. LaDawn.
So how do you follow that? Thank you so much for having me here. Daryl, always showing out, especially when you're first. So I'm LaDawn Sullivan, and I'm actually from Denver, Colorado, born and semi-raised, because I did move around in the South for some of my childhood, but have worked professionally in Denver at the Denver Foundation for over 22 years. And there I have been very refinedly focused in kind of, I would say, very close to what Daryl mentioned, but maybe a little different. As a community foundation, we work directly with low income and communities of color, but to be a person on the inside, a person of color on the inside of the institution, a philanthropic institution, you can wear many hats. So I've been an interpreter, I've been a mediator, a convener, an intentional space holder, and I would say also deliberately dismantling power to ensure that our communities actually have an intentional seat at the decision-making table when it comes to how philanthropic resources, and that's not just money, it's also influence, it's power, and I would say, and knowledge about how things work and how systems work. I'm very fortunate in my time at the foundation to really be able to engage, particularly African Americans, in engaging in the supply side of philanthropy, as Daryl said, being givers, not just the receivers, and mobilizing as donors in the foundation, whether that be through giving circles or more recently in elevating a collective strategy that's now called BRIC, the Black Resilience in Colorado Fund, which is set to help the Black community in the greater Metro Denver area to move from surviving to thriving. That we recognize the under-resourcement of our under-resourcing of our community is historical. And this is something that we are striving to dismantle and really shift the paradigm so that our communities can actually be those ultimate powerhouses that really drives our own destiny.
Thank you, LaDawn. That was powerful. Absolutely. And last but definitely not least, Simone, please tell us about yourself and our sponsor. We're so happy to have Shea Moisture sponsoring this panel.
We're so happy to sponsor this amazing, I'm sure going to be amazing and very important conversation. And with LaDawn, I'm like, how do I follow now, Daryl? Now, I will say, I think the beauty is I get to add on, right?
That's right.
That's right.
So my name is Simone Jordan, and I head our community commerce for Shea Moisture. Shea Moisture is a brand under Unilever Companies, a personal care company, and I'm super excited to have this conversation. We've been doing it much more this year. I'm talking about community commerce, which as a model is to invest proceeds from Shea Moisture purchases back into our communities.
Nice.
And those who we serve are those who are at most or at need most. And that has been Black communities historically, over time, and still today continue to be Black communities. So the community commerce model, I have the pleasure and the honor of being able to take the money that comes from our community, from our purchases, and invest them back into communities of color. And specifically over the years, it's really been in women of color and supporting them through entrepreneurship, training, education, ensuring, because we do believe that when you support women, you're supporting communities as a whole, and that is the investment that we need right now, today, the innovation, the determination, how they support their own families and support their communities, we want to invest in. And so just as a background, I actually came to Shea Moisture from a civil rights org from the National Urban League.
Nice.
And that's very unique a lot of times to see my position in a for-profit, in a CPG, because, you know, it showed that the family, it was a Black founded, Black family owned brand. And I came in during that time, and they just knew that their consumers were a community. It wasn't that they were just looking at them as someone who was purchasing, but they were listening to them. They were figuring out, how do I invest back in them? If they're giving this company the ability to grow, then we do have to figure out how to invest to make sure that our communities can sustain and transform lives within it. So super excited to be here. Can't wait to have more of a conversation about how we invest in Black communities so that they can continue to transform and thrive.
Well, let's get right into it. That's my first question. Why is it important? I mean, I know we know the answer, but for the audience, why is it important to invest in the Black community? You know, in general and specifically, what are each of you doing to do this? I'll start with you, Simone.
Oh, there's so much already. I want to give somebody else a chance, but I think just to continue where I left off, I think it's important to invest in Black communities because a lot of times you do see that we do it for ourselves. And it's important that if you're going to be a part of the change, you should be part of the community. So it's not always about looking and, you know, thinking about where should the investments go, but giving it to those who actually are in their communities and doing a great work. So for us with community commerce, again, we're putting our money into Black-owned businesses because we know that they're the heartbeat of our communities. They are there central to these communities. They are hearing from those that don't always have the resources and the things that they need, and they're coming out of pocket without even having the money themselves. So what we know about a lot of our Black businesses is that they're bootstrapping. They're trying to figure out ways to create businesses, keep their businesses afloat, as we definitely have seen this year as they've run the risk of being closed out, but still that doesn't stop them from actually investing back into their communities. And so for us, this is, you know, for me, just we've seen this from Black Wall Street, we continue to see it. And now that we're in another recession, it's amazing that we continue to put our community first and then think about ourselves right after that. So for us, it's about, if you've been putting this money, your own money into this community, then how can we as a company support you? You will run out of money, you will run out of energy, you will run out of things that are needed to sustain taking care of others if someone else is not pouring into you. So for us, that's why it's really important to start with Black-owned businesses, start with the community itself, to allow them who know their needs to be able to invest back into themselves.
And let me just add a point to this, and I'll let you others answer as well. So why now? Why do you think it's so important to do this now?
Yeah, and just for us, we've been doing it for a while as a brand, Shea Moisture. And I think that's always important to note is that we did not start when there became a big call to action to invest back in Black communities. We've always invested back in Black communities. And I think that's because we know we are and have been part of the community from our founding. And so now it is very important, but it's always been important. So for us, we're challenging our own companies under Unilever, as well as other companies, to not let it just be this year too. When you've heard that communities needed this, they've always needed this. So I love your question where you're saying why now, but it's like, why now and why does it need to be sustainable, right? Why should we always continue to invest? And I know Daryl and LaDawn will actually answer that question, but it's not a matter of now. We have to continue this investment in Black communities.
Absolutely. Daryl, let's hear your thoughts on this.
You know, I'm a big history buff, so
Yes.
And I recognize that we are only carrying on the tradition that was handed to us. The blueprint is good if we know the blueprint. We have given in a way from the time that we came from the shores of the continent, when it was very complex. Our giving was about survival. Right. And so as I look at how we progressed through some different times, through challenging times, we find ourselves now back in a time of crisis. And historically, when we were in times of crisis, that brought out the best in people. So folks would take what they had to address the needs of their people. And so what's interesting now as I survey is that people who sometimes have the perception of nothing are figuring out a way to take care of their neighbor, to help a family, help a friend. And I was always one that, well, if we can do it in times of crisis, we can do it when there's no perceived crisis. But for Black folk, we've always been perceived in some type of crisis. So I think carrying on the tradition that folks that came before us said, hey, we're going to give. And there's this old proverb that I always like. It says, until the lion has its own historian, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And for us as a people, we have to continue to tell our own story about how we give and take care of each other. Because if we don't, somebody else will frame it and we will be seen as a group that can only have our hands out. And I think that we've shown over the years that we can give in a certain way, and not out of surplus, but out of substance. Absolutely. You know, the lady on the block may not have much, but that sewing is just as good as somebody who swoops in the outside and comes in and gives. So historically, we're carrying on a tradition. As I used to tell my students, I say, you know, when you start to really understand your history, it's going to turn on your light bulb.
Amen. I love that. But let me ask you before I let LaDawn speak, tell me to expand upon what Simone was saying. Do you feel that it's more important to do this now, or our level of importance has always been the same?
I think the fallout through this one could be great. So it's going to require that maybe some folks that have been standing thinking that it's somebody else's responsibility.
Right.
We need to bring some more people into the fold.
Right.
And I think this notion that we've done a disservice to folks to think that only people who can play is if I have significant financial capital, or I may come from a certain level of reputational capital. And then other people will look and say, well, that's somebody else's responsibility. And I'm saying, no, you have to be a good steward of what you have. And we can get more people sowing into the community, the better we'll be. And like Simone says, we've always had black businesses that have taken up the torch and the mantle to invest in Black communities. And I think hope more will join the bandwagon now who've been sitting and watching.
Thank you for that. That was perfect. Thank you. LaDawn.
Oh man. So the two of them just blew it out of the water. And so what would I just say? Ditto.
Ditto. Next question.
No, the only thing I would add is because the work that I do does not necessarily directly intersect with Black business, but what I do recognize is that the organizations, the nonprofits and groups and organizations that have now long lived and some emerging in our communities they actually are social enterprises themselves. They hire our own people, they serve our own people. Right. And when you say why now? Well, why now is because when you're talking about two pandemics that disproportionately are affecting our community, who are you going to trust? You're going to trust your own. You're going to come to your own. And so if why now we should support our Black businesses, our Black nonprofits, our Black organizations, is because our people are coming to us. And so we need to, it's almost like in many other communities, the dollar, not that it's just about the dollar, but the resource may turn over numerous times before it goes outside of out of that community's perspective circle. And I say in this moment, when you look over, when you look historically at, and I would say more in modern time, the Black dollar, it doesn't stay in our community. Right. It leaves our community sometimes faster than one time around. And so this moment is a moment where we can see our resources be recycled numerous times. So when I think about Black businesses who are giving back, maybe they're feeding those in the community and also providing services and or products in the community, and those dollars are coming back, there's still a way for the for the community that surrounds that business, for us to recycle those resources over and over again to continue to edify our community from the inside out, instead of waiting for others to come, and I'm not saying we do, but there is this notion that someone else is going to come rescue us, as Daryl mentioned. And if we haven't learned anything in history, Black folks always end up rescuing themselves. It's just real.
Let me ask you all this question. Why do you think that there is that notion that someone's going to come rescue us? That's one part. And part two is, why do you feel, or what is your opinion on African Americans or people of color not supporting Black businesses? Like, where do you think that comes from? And how do we stop that way of thinking and having people of color support small businesses of other people of color, whether it's nail salon, hair, like whatever it is, grocery store? Like, how do we just sort of like retrain our thinking to really do for us, by us? I'll let you answer that first, Daryl.
Oof.
Did I throw you on the spot? Need a minute?
Okay. So I'm since I'm a big history buff, I'm always pulled from.
I love the history. That's fantastic.
That walked before me. So I'm gonna initially go to what Brother Carter G. Woodson said when he wrote The Miseducation Negro.
Yes.
You don't have to, when you control a person's thinking, you don't have to worry about the action. You don't have to make him go to the back door. He will go to the back door without being told. But this notion that if somebody gets hold of this, they don't have to force you to go in a sub place. They don't have to make you go to the back door. You'll go on your own. So part of what's still happening is this notion that we are still looking at ourselves through the eyes of other people, instead of looking at our eyes through ourselves.
That's right.
That's the second piece around why we, I think why we might be waiting some time and rescuing, is this notion that we have been shown through history sometimes that it's a leader, a person. And what we're finding now is that we may have some young brother over here, a young sister over here, somebody there that are raising up and doing stuff. And it's not going to be one person that's coming to do something for us. So I'm a big believer that, in the world I came from, God gave you some abilities and some talents. If you don't bring them to the world and sow them, then the world is going to miss something because you didn't bring it and you didn't sow it. And your sowing, my sowing is not like Simone. It's not like LaDawn, and it's not like yours, Stephanie, because I had to take what I've been given and I need to sow it in the way that it's been given. And so we always say, take your eyes off other folks' table and just start sowing where you can sow. And I think we'd be better off if we just do what we think we can do and not focus on what we think somebody else can do for us. I'll stop there.
Preach. Simone, do you care to expand upon that, please?
Yeah, and I want to make sure I'm answering your question. So I think the conversation is around, one, why is there such a reservation for our communities to support our businesses specifically, right? And just to address that point, because I think Daryl and LaDawn has some great points that they mentioned before that really go to answer this. And I think it's about building trust, right? And so what we have understood, even for us, and I like to share this with all of the small minority and Black-owned businesses that we serve for Shea Moisture, and the lessons that we have ourselves been, we had to show accountability, right? We had to show that when you put money into us, we're putting money back into the communities that are helping us grow. And so I think where there becomes a reservation is because we tend to put money into businesses. And if you're looking at Black-owned businesses, remember, I was speaking about them bootstrapping. So they don't always have the opportunity to put that money and sow that money back into their communities, because it has to go back into their own purses, into their own families, because they took from it just to build that business. And so what happens, the disconnect is if you're not part of that family that's building their generational wealth, but you put a dollar out, you're not seeing the dollar back into yourself. And so bigger companies, white companies, they tend to sometimes be able to have that flexibility to say, we can create, you know, we can donate $5 million and show that we put this big donation towards Black communities. And it makes you go, well, maybe I should shop with them because they're actually showing that investment. And so it really is on us to figure out, how do we give Black-owned businesses the ability to show their value and put back into their community without actually having to take away from their own generational wealth that they're building. And so it really is about that trust that LaDawn talked about. It's how can I know that when I put money into this, it is actually going to be an investment for something that will either help me or help those in my community that are in need. And so I think that that's definitely something we're doing. Shea Moisture, we have this new initiative called the Social Justice Coalition.
Nice.
And what we're doing is literally doing this pilot program. We've taken $100,000. We're doing $20,000 per business, and we're investing in them, pairing them with a mentor, a social justice thought leader, and ensuring that they can figure out a model that serves their community and not having to come out of pocket to actually support their communities, but from this $20,000 that we will award them, be able to, again, continue to maintain their business, invest in the impact they want to see in their communities, and then actually have the guidance and the training to understand mobilizing, to understand organizing, understand those things that Black communities trust as bringing change and value back into their communities.
That is fantastic. How's it going?
It is awesome.
It's going amazing. We're in a pilot program, and so we're just in the application stage, but our thought leaders, we have amazing group of 8 people who are from, all levels of social justice and thought leadership, from, professors. We have Melissa Harris-Perry, we have Tamika Mowry, we have all of these amazing minds that are ready to say, we have to figure out how Black businesses can show their value and show how they actually protect and serve their communities without having to go be cash strapped and go broke or close their doors to do it. So we're all super excited to figure out, how do we take something like this and grow and develop it so that more companies are investing in Black-owned businesses, not just for their goods and services and their intellect, but also for what they actually do as a community impact into their community.
Yeah, I salute and applaud that. That's fantastic. That's a great story, and I wish you all tons of success with that. And that sort of leads me to you, LaDawn, because from a local level, Brick is doing pretty much the same thing. So if you could talk about that, that'd be fantastic. And then if you remember my questions, you can answer that too.
I was like, what was the question again? So if you don't, I'm going to regress just for a moment, because I would not be right if I did not say, I just want to also make a history connection point, maybe more internal or more familial, at least for me. The generations of my family shop Black because it was rooted in how the education was built in my family. So I'm just saying, my grandmother was explicit about supporting Black business, and that was taught to her kids, who taught it to me, and I'm teaching it to my kids. So I totally, I was gonna say, and I totally agree with everything that's been said, but I do want to lift that up, because I remember one time sitting with my grandmother, and she said, in the midst of the civil rights movement, our community became glassy-eyed and was looking over the fence because we weren't allowed to be in white spaces and white stores and et cetera. Right. And so it became something that we aspired to do. And unfortunately, it kind of grayed out our connection to the roots of supporting our own through business in our own community, and that got lost. And so I just want to lift that up because I even feel that's in parallel when we're talking about giving. When Daryl was, we've talked about giving in this earlier conversation. In our families, it's how we carry forth the education, the history, and the understanding, and the action. So the action piece is really important, and I would say, like, even through BRIC, yes, we are providing grants to help very under-resourced, very exhausted Black organizations in the greater Denver metro area, but coupling that with other types of supports, and that's very similar to Simone, providing coaching, providing what we call an executive directors of Color Institute, where folks have a 2-year program in which they can learn and share with their peers. And quite frankly, we're also digging into connecting with the larger philanthropic community, because like it or not, they're pouring dollars into our communities, especially right now, but a lot of times without a lot of understanding and direction. And so how do we share what we're doing, like what Simone is doing, and definitely the work that Daryl's been doing, that literally, I mean, Daryl won't say it, but he's mentored me for like the last 15 years. I'm giving you your flowers, Daryl.
Oh.
But, also building that broader understanding. And even in this context, we're having an opportunity to connect with each other to broaden our learning, our sharing, our connection, our reach, our network, so that we can actually create bigger ripple effects. Because, we can do this in these individual spaces, but what really will be a tipping point in our community, in the Black community, is that we knit the work together. That's going to be one of the most important ways that we can continue to support Black nonprofits, Black social enterprise, Black small business, big business, all the business. I just want to make sure that it's all knitted together. It's just really important.
And I like that phrase, knit it together. So how do we do that? How do we knit everything together to make it sustainable beyond COVID? Go ahead, Darryl. I see your lips forming.
Well, I think, a lot of what Simone and LaDawn lifting up around, when I think about if we saw more, because the vehicle to tell our story of philanthropy is still not there yet. We've gotten some more people into the space. Mm-hmm. So when I think about what my lens sees around Black businesses is that I see the company that provides the baseball uniforms for the young brothers from the baseball team on the other side of town.
Right.
Well, that's not going to be profiled in somebody's philanthropy thing. And I think part of it is we have to, one, find vehicles to lift up our philanthropy in the way it's happening. Because when other folks lift it up, it's sometimes only lifted up around, look how many dollars we poured. No, sometimes it's just that business that gave something to this baseball team so they can have a uniform. And I continue to see those things happening. I have a special needs daughter, and so I continue to see smaller Black businesses that sow into the kids that are like my daughter, who are on the other side of the track, who don't have access to the therapies. So they're stepping up. They just don't get the visibility. So sometimes it's this thought that, oh, they're not doing it. Yeah, they're doing it. It's just that it's not lifted up. And sometimes they don't want it lifted up. They want to say, hey, Daryl, that's organically about who I am. I wouldn't call it that. I just sow that way. And I think that is important, because from the small business to the big business, sometimes they are doing some things that the large philanthropy sometimes won't name, but they're doing it because as many large philanthropies and foundations we may have, it still took grassroots giving on the ground to keep some neighborhoods connected. Right. So that'd be the first thing is tell the story and we keep telling the story. We keep passing the story along so that our kids are not sitting in class talking about somebody else does the giving.
That's right. And that leads me to you, Simone. Talk to me about why it's so important for Shea Moisture to invest in female entrepreneurs, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And I'm wondering if anyone else has ever really done that. I really applaud and salute this effort.
Yeah. This is, so again, because Shea Moisture, our number one consumer with multicultural hair, we started the business for women of color, specifically Black women, to feel confident, to feel great in wearing their natural hair. There wasn't a lot of representation of them in the beauty industry. So what the Dennis family was able to create with Shea Moisture, a place for them to feel confident about, confident in the workplace, confident at home, confident when you in any endeavor that you have, that Shea Moisture was with you. And so one of the places that we found after beauty that women of color did not feel confident was actually getting venture capital and getting in these boardrooms in the places that they actually needed to get funding. So the story is a thread of we're always going to be where our consumer feels like there is a need for us to serve them. And right now at this time, beyond beauty, it is with entrepreneurship. They are, I believe, being invested in, and maybe this year, and the statistic may have improved because so many people have met this need this year. But for a long time, women of color are creating businesses at faster rates than any other entrepreneur, yet they were seeing 0.0302% of the capital that was needed to sustain their businesses. Wow. So that large of a void, you definitely knew that that's where we needed to show up, specifically when you have, Richard Dennis, the Dennis family, they started this business themselves as entrepreneurs. So this is our way of creating a seed back into this community. And so you're seeing more and more people invest in women of color, entrepreneurs specifically, I think this year. And I think, I pray it's not a trend, but a lot of great things come with trends. So, I hope that they continue. It's really about showing up. So when you actually do receive the resources that's needed by showing, see, this is what happens when you actually invest. They're able to, create wealth. They're able to start more businesses. They're able to do things for themselves. I think we'll continue to see a momentum around investing in this community. And just to add in to Daryl's point before, where not too many times do you see the small business and what they're doing for their communities, but you see the big business because, again, sometimes they're investing a larger amount of money, but it's as important to recognize those that it may not have been money, it may have been time, it may have been volunteering, it may have been in all these other places. And so for Shea Moisture, we want to make sure that we're amplifying those stories. And so it's not always about what money we put into our communities, but then what did that business that we invested in, what were they able to do? Let's tell the story of those that we invested in and then what they were able to do with that money. And so I hope I continue to also see that being amplified. I think there's more storytelling and more elevating what Black-owned businesses, what women of color are doing for their communities. And so that it's been very important for us. And it was interesting, before we were acquired from Unilever, people were asking us, like, I didn't know community commerce was a thing for Shea Moisture. And that's because we were a smaller brand then. And so we were humble. We didn't say what we were doing because it was never about us and our investments. It was about the businesses and them being able to then be empowered and do for their communities. So we're creating ambassadors of our brand. We're not just we're not donating, we're investing. And we're saying, if the work is actually working, then that business, that community will talk for us. We don't always have to do the talking ourselves.
That is fantastic. And talk to me about the mentor part of this. So how does that work, and how long is that mentor with the grantee, grantor, the person who gets the grant?
No, so we've always had the way we've invested has been through education mainly. What we do know is that sometimes you can put the money into the community, but it'll exit as fast as you put it in if they don't have the knowledge to actually understand how to keep it, to grow it, and to scale that money. And so whenever we've looked at doing community commerce, it's been paired with education. We've typically gone with institutions. We've done those that have been part of our legacy, which is Babson and Dartmouth College, Tuck School of Business, because that's what gave our founder his start. But we're continuing to grow our institutions that we're investing in. But this year, and that's why I love everything that LaDawn is saying about her model, and I hope to learn more about it and be able to apply, or actually, what did you just say, for us to, bring it together. Yes, because I think, we've always given to institutions to then train our entrepreneurs. But what we're looking at this year is to say, how do we actually make mentors of those that are doing the good work in their community, and then allowing them, paying them to be able to pay it forward. So this is a new model for us, where we're going directly to individuals versus not institutions, to be those that actually educate our entrepreneurs. We're now, with the Social Justice Coalition, looking at how we use individuals and thought leaders to actually grow and scale what our businesses do.
That's wonderful. And that's just a great segue to you, LaDawn. Let's talk about BRIC and what you're doing with this wonderful organization that I am proud to be a board member of.
Yes, yes, you are. Thanks so much. As I mentioned before, so I should say BRIC was established on Juneteenth this year, so June 20th this year. Our goal is to raise $1.5 million in its first year, and to grant out $1 million of those dollars. We haven't reached our goal yet, but we're only 3 months in, and we're well over $1 million. So that kind of tells you, one, where we are with these 2 pandemics in the community, and how folks are feeling a sense of urgency to make investments. But I will say too that, the creation of the BRIC Fund, it is very much rooted in a for us, by us, ensuring that the entire committee that advises its trajectory, they're all African American, that it is specifically focused on Black-led and Black-serving nonprofit organizations, that we are, all of our practices are rooted in a practice of trust and not testing. We know, like, as I've told the board, traditionally in philanthropy, particularly organizations of color, are tested, and it's always, you're given a little bit, and they will say, go ahead and try it, and if it looks good to us, we'll support it with a little bit more. That's not how the BRIC Fund is operating. Our whole philosophy and practice is to work in collaboration and partnership in a spirit of trust. And so it's focused on general operating support, not tying people down to program. We want to create flexibility, the ability for our community partners to be nimble and address the needs of the community as they see fit. But also, again, coupling these other resources, like our Executive Directors of Color Institute. We have another program that focuses specifically on racial equity, for organizations of color to do their own internal assessment to determine how they can dismantle white-centered practice in their organizations, because often that is sort of thrust upon them to be a part of, I guess if you want to say, the nonprofit club that is very steeped in whiteness. And so we're really trying to, I think, build a substantial foundation that holds these pillars of I would say, in some ways, I say just the power of Blackness is the best way I can describe it, of being true to the history, the culture, the resilience, the brilliance of who we are. We are creative geniuses. We do so much with so little. So if there's an opportunity to increase from little to much, I cannot fathom or imagine what our community can do, and what those, the leaders that are a part, that are mobilizing and operationalizing their work in community can do. And that's really the center of our focus. And we're only like 3 months old.
Yeah, no, but you're being incredibly modest, because I will say the process, talk about the process for applicants to even apply for these grants. You've made it so simple, because sometimes when you go for these grant applications, you need like a PhD to figure it out, and they want everything, you know, they want the world from you, but Brick's process is fantastic. So please expand upon that. You're being too modest, LaDawn.
Okay, sorry. So
I just want you guys to know, like the whole time I was like, grab my pen and paper and like,
yeah. So I would be remiss if I did not give credit where credit is due. We have what I'm considering a sister organization in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, called the Poise Foundation. And their CEO, Mark Lewis, has been just an incredible partner in sharing the tools and resources that they've used to create, I would say, very welcoming processes to Black organizations. So one is being really clear and using very simple language, making things drop-down menus and clickable, because we are in a virtual world. So, but also really simple to just provide information. Again, not being in a space of testing where we're being super critical of every little thing you're doing and how you're doing it, but really trusting that you know the community you serve, you know the place of your organization in the broader community, and you are going to be able to share in your own words what that looks like and how you will utilize resources to continue that work, or maybe even expand and enhance the work. And that's really the core of what it is. I'll also say this. I've been in situations in traditional philanthropy where people have been dinged because they misspelled a word, or their application isn't written because quite frankly, with organizations in our community being undersourced, do you think that they have dollars for a grant writer? I choose between paying a grant writer or actually feeding more people in my community. Which one am I going to choose if I'm really an authentic leader in my community? I'm going to pick to feed the people. So we take all of that into account as we not only talk to folks before they apply, as we review their applications, and as the board next week reviews and has conversations about the organizations. We have 57 applications, which is quite a lot.
3 months in, yes, it is.
Yes, 2 months in, with $1.4 million in requests. And so obviously there's a need there, and we're going to do everything we can, even for the groups that may not receive direct financial resources. We're also looking at ways in which we can provide other resources or connect them, because that's what we're supposed to do, and that's who we are. Thinking about the roots of our 5 T's: time, talent, treasure, testimony, and social ties. We're trying to operationalize on every single one of those in BRIC.
That's fantastic. I'm very proud to be a part of this organization. So Daryl, talk to me and the group about why you became a Black philanthropist. Like, what inspired you to do this, and how are you inspiring other young people to get involved with giving back?
Well, that goes back to Ruth and James Lester, who raised 6 kids in the South. My dad served this country in the Korean and Vietnam War.
Wow.
Came back to the South, and because he bumped into Jim Crow and second-class citizenship, he said, I'm gonna figure out a way to take care of my family. So my dad created a taxi business and was able to put, a lot of us through college. And so I give so much credit to my parents, but to the people of Marion, South Carolina, because I think I was incubated in a really, really rich culture that, to this day, when I go home, people are reminding me, that you're supposed to be doing great things where you are, but don't forget to come back. And I think that's what gave rise. When I stepped into organized philanthropy, I was never confused around the tradition and the impact that Black folks were having on the world of giving and philanthropy. What I wanted to do was change that paradigm. And so what I did, one of the things we did was we revived an old tradition that I saw growing up in Marion, that most of y'all probably saw too. When a neighbor is in crisis or a person around the street, we pool what we have. So we took that old concept and we revived it. The world called it giving circles. We called it just collective giving. But we wanted to make sure that folks realize that if psychologically you feel you don't have it, when you connect with your friend or your cousin or your boy or your sister, collectively, we can move some things. And so we created the network just out of a notion. And people think, is this something new? I said, no, this is very old. But we wanted to make sure that brothers and sisters who were part of giving circles also understood what was happening inside of these walls of community foundations. And so they created their fund there. So not only did it get them at the table and they were looking through the inside out, they also recognized that this tool eliminated some distrust sometimes, that I didn't have to look at you and say, are you holding the money? Who's holding the money? And so Demystifying Philanthropy was a journey that we were on. And all of that came from just being able to be a staff member it's like, and you remember the old movie, The Spook Who Sat by the Door?
Yeah.
So I felt like in philanthropy during that time, the only black person to ever work for this community foundation, only black man. And I remember that if I was able to get in and learn something, my responsibility is that I better take something back to folks across the other side. And so by doing that, now we have, what do we have, LaDawn? 15, 16 circles across the United States. And these folks are sewing. And so I'll say this and I'll be quiet.
No, it's amazing. No, please, we need to know about this. Is great. And
LaDawn knows our good friend, Tim McIntyre. So when I was working at the Community Foundation, I used to go sit in a barber chair by this young brother who had finished at North Carolina Central University. And so he began to ask me every day, what is this community foundation you work for? What do y'all do? So I had two choices. I could brush him off as if, well, why am I going to talk to you about it? Because you're not a philanthropist. But I'm glad that I did not dismiss my friend. I said, Tim, here's what we do. Here's how it works. Little did I know he was moving from renting a chair to owning the salon. And when he owned the salon, the first thing that he did was try to figure out a way to do something for young brothers and sisters in that community. So what they do, come get your hair done free, come get your hair cut free, because academically you show some progress.
Nice.
And so I forgot what year it was, but the Association of Black Foundation Executives honored him with the emerging leader in philanthropy that year. He's the only person who got the award that I can recall, LaDawn, help me out, that was never working for a foundation.
I would agree with that. Yep.
His daily job was a barber. He owned salons. And you can imagine how that changed people's perception around who they think has it. And so to me, that is the exciting things, because there's so many Macintoshes. But when we start thinking about the Martell Dawsons who worked for the Mortar Company, who sold all that money into higher education, we start thinking about Osceola McCarthy, who was a dishwoman and took care of people's house. Those are the folks, to me, they made sacrifices to sow. And to me, that means nobody's off the hook, right?
Right.
Because if old folk can sow, those of us who have the appearance of some stuff can continue to sow.
Boy, you just be dropping science. I like that. Thank you very much for that one. Salute. I do believe that we all are philanthropists, to some degree in what we do, right? We don't have to be working for a foundation. For myself, it's funny because, I don't know, as I've gotten older, I found that I'm at a point in my life where I want to give back more. Like, I feel like it's my duty and my calling to give back. And the way that I do it with my husband is through our film festival, right? So we show the works of all of these filmmakers, some you know, some you don't. And it gives us such joy, not the celebrities on the stage, but it gives us such joy when we meet another filmmaker who was in our festival in the early days, and they come back to us and say, it's Stephanie, you're the only film festival that accepted us. And because of the faith that you had in our film, we were able to do X, Y, and Z. And that makes me feel really good, So that leads to my next question, and you've already answered it, Daryl. It's for Simone and LaDawn. Why is this important to you personally? Forget where you work. Why is this important to you, and what are you getting out of it? I'll let you go first, Simone.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I hope I'm able to put more of my role into companies like Unilever. I don't think there's enough of us there. What I get to see being in this environment is that if I wasn't here, where would that money go? And so how do I make it my personal responsibility to come into these places where a lot of times when you looked at corporate social responsibility, it sometimes went far into their supply chains, into India and into places where they look at very impoverished communities and say, how do we give clothes? How do we give shoes? How do we give running water to these communities? What it leaves out and what I bring into this in my own, intentional purpose in being in these companies is, did you also know that there are kids that do not have running water and do not have shoes and do not have shirts in Black communities right in your own neighborhoods, in your backyard? So let's stop taking that money and sending it so far when our money, the Black community, we're spending $1 trillion on these businesses, and yet this money is going around us. It's not actually coming back into those that have actually put money into them. And so that's just been my own personal journey. And I've been sharing it more and more, especially this year, to say, put more of us in there. We always are looking at these positions around marketing and advertising and some of these C-suite positions where it's a perceived level of leadership that actually impacts our community, but create purpose positions, right? Create a community commerce, create this position like I have where my job every day, and though I may be tired this year because we've done a lot more work to really support our communities, I wake up every day figuring out a new way that I can take money that my community has put into my company and actually put it back into them. And so we have a rule from even our supply chain. We source our shea butter from Africa, from Ghana. And you really see it there, which is if you're ever going to take out, whether it be an ingredient or anything else, you have to put back in order for them to survive, in order for them then to thrive. And so we have to apply the same principles in the US. You may not be taking a natural resource that, like an ingredient like shea butter, from Black communities in the US, but you are taking that dollar. And when you take $1 out of our community, invest back in. And I think, whether we're talking about, I think Daryl talked about this and LaDawn has talked about this, I understand this principle from tithing. I understand it from things that I have just been brought up to know that in order for you to be blessed, in order for, there to be growth, and you have to give in order to get. And so 100%. I think that's where the personal, I live in Brooklyn right now. I'm actually from Maryland, and then my family's from Lynchburg, Virginia. And I have this sense of Southern history that I see these things that have worked over time, may not have gotten the visibility, but I know that there's old standing communities that are still standing and still able to survive because their communities poured into them. So I take that and I apply it now to big business. There are some things that we can learn from our history that will continue to allow our communities to thrive.
Yeah, perfectly said. LaDawn?
So I would say a couple, I'm going to try to be quick. Couple things. Just a couple things. So maybe I'll state more so from like my career trajectory first, even though it's not first in my heart, but I would say it's first. I've been given a lot of opportunity, mostly because I was super nosy. And when I came into philanthropy, I was actually hired in the finance department. That has nothing to do with being out in community. But I heard people talking about my community as if I was not a part of it, nor was there anyone holding intentional space for the voice of Black and Brown people in a community foundation that was trying to engage Black and Brown people. And so I would just say I feel like it's a part of my professional calling to be a behind the scenes connector that, at least for me, I wake up every morning excited that I get to continue to build understanding of Black people, Black and Brown people, to shift their mindset of being a grantee or a recipient to a giver, into this space that is very, often is completely against the stereotype that traditional philanthropy and I would even say the nonprofit sector continues to perpetuate, even in this moment of reckoning, which I am like, You guys are like in the midst of the storm and you still don't see that you need to change your language and the way you work. Well, we're going to keep on pushing and making that happen. But it also takes us being prepared to be in those rooms and in those seats. And that's, to me, that's my heart's work. I would add to that, I was very fortunate my best friend was my grandmother. And no slight to my mom, just me and my grandma were super tight. She was a civil rights activist who really went through the ringer to even be counted as a human being. And, she wanted to be an attorney, but there was no way in her time that was going to happen. Then she pushed to be a school teacher, and she went through numerous rejections and horrible things to become a teacher in Denver. And in that trajectory, she became the first woman to be the local chapter of a core chapter in the country. And that kind of tenacity to ensure that change happens, it wasn't selfish. Her positioning was like, how do I position myself so I can help more people, so I can widen the door? And those are the shoulders I stand on. And that is how I envision myself. This isn't about LaDawn Sullivan. So in the creation of Brick and any of the work I've done, it's never been about me. It's about the people in the community that deserve to be in these spaces where people with power and influence that don't look like the people on this call are calling the shots for the people who are on this call. So I want to make sure that we are not only shifting the narrative, but we're shifting the rooms. And quite frankly, if they don't want to let us in the rooms, then we'll build our own rooms, our own houses, our own blocks, our own cities, our own whatever we have to do in order for us to be in our rightful place in this greater society, basically in this world, because we are deserving of it.
Absolutely.
Let me get my wife my handkerchief.
We are running out of time. I could talk to the three of you all day, but I have one final question and for closing. So in this new world of Black Lives Matter, of course, we've always known that Black and Brown lives have mattered. It's just others that are now realizing that. How do we keep that momentum going? How do we still hold companies accountable with all the great things that they're doing now to support people of color? How do we not let this end in 2021? Whoever wants to go first. Simone, you're on mute. There you go.
And the sun, I apologize. I don't apologize. I love a good, the sun pouring down on me.
It's hitting your face beautifully.
I'm okay with the sunlight, so I won't apologize. I think it's a combination of a lot of things we talked about on this, in this session, which is putting people in the places in these businesses that can ensure that this doesn't just feel like a trend, that it doesn't feel like a one-off. So I think that we've seen it. You've seen the, what was the challenge for? The pull up for change. Mm-hmm. And so where they were saying, let us see who is actually leading these businesses, because if you do not have enough brown and Black faces in these businesses, it can feel like a one-off, or it may feel like they're just donating, but they're not actually investing. Like, investing is to continue pouring into it because you see something that is a return, and that's not always money back into the company, but that you're actually changing the communities that are actually consuming you, right? And so I think it is a combination of that, making sure that the leadership is there to sustain these type of investments in Black and brown communities. And then I think it's a call to action for each of us, whether you're inside a business or not, to just say, if I choose to put my money into this thing, then I want to make sure that either it allows me to support those that are in need in my community and in my family, or I'm not putting my money into it, right? And so I think that has to apply not only to big businesses, but it also has to apply to our smaller businesses. Again, I understand that it takes a lot to actually pour back into a community when you're just trying to sustain yourself. But I think that's how you build trust. right? That's something we talked about early on. And so we have to continue to build trust. I think even if you can't do it, to LaDawn's point, there are orgs, there's nonprofits that you can pair with your company. You can volunteer with them. You can figure out how you support them, and be able to actually have that change. So I would say a combination of build trust, also make sure that the leadership is there to continue to sustain these investments. And then we probably will continue to see the impact we're making in 2020.
Thank you.
So we'll let the professor go last. I would just add to Simone's comment. I would say, Black Lives Matter, the word reparations often sends people into a tailspin, some people. But I always think about equitable investment. So, when we talk about Black Lives Matter and a moment to a movement, when I'm thinking of something that is sustainable and long-term, I'm thinking about a lot of companies or individuals outside of the Black community may have given an initial contribution. I can't call it an investment, it's a contribution.
Right.
Some of it to assuage their guilt of being white, of taking advantage, or maybe earning significant incomes off of the backs and sweat and pocketbooks of Black people. And so when we're talking about an equitable investment, whatever, as we're thinking going forward, it is one, calling out that it can't be just a one-time $5 gift. It needs to be more than that. And it needs to be something that speaks to an equitable investment to ensure that when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, and I would say readjusting how Black people are seen, how we are positioned, and I'm not saying how other people position us, but how we choose to be positioned. And the forward progression of our communities so that we are afforded and have access to every opportunity for whatever better life, however you want to deem that phrase, for our community going forward, then whatever that resource, whether it be a check or other things, times 100, because some of it has to do, when you say Black Lives Matter, you're talking about a value.
Right.
And so I'm talking about readjusting. One, we have to make sure that we're really clear about our value, so that when we're talking about moving from a moment to a movement, we're clear and we're deliberate and we declare our value, and that we will not accept anything less than what we say our collective value is. And to me, that speaks to then how resources and how we lead our community forward, and quite frankly, declare how others will, how they are to show up in order to be a part of that, or in order for them to write that. I don't know how a better way to say it, but I just think that that's really important, that we're really thinking about it. Also from our own, we also have some things to do to make sure that we understand our value. Because to me, that's part of it too. It's a great declarative statement, but I want us to really be able to say, when I say Black Lives Matter, and I'm actually able to demonstrate a value, and I will not accept less than that.
Y'all make me come behind y'all two at the end, huh? Okay. All right. Well, first, let me acknowledge the presence of you all too, because I only sit here because of the power of a Black woman, and grandmamas and grandmamas before them. So thank you for allowing me to share in the space. First thing I would say is that I think we have to continue to reclaim our journey and our story. There's too much now that we're finding out after the fact of that we've done. And I'm always thankful for when movies and stuff come out that already affirm that we knew we were in some of this stuff. And so I am glad that, I'm always telling folks, you got to go and learn your story. And so there are these 5 questions that my mentors always said to me. You need to know who you are. You need to know whose you are. You need to know why you're here. You need to know where you've been. And you need to know where you're going. But ultimately, once you get there, you need to know what contribution you were planning to make. And so I think that reclaiming of our history and our story is important. Secondly, this notion, I've heard it for a while too, folks will say, we got to give back, we got to give back. But you know what now? I've changed that. We need to give black. So it ain't just giving back, because we got folks that give back. But when we sometimes look at it, it's not black. And I don't fault folks if they give to broader things, because I think that's people's wherewithal to where they want to give. But I also say, if we're going to change some of the outcomes in our own community, we got to give black. Finally, our intellectual capital cannot continue to go to nonprofits who don't hire and don't have folks that look like us involved in it. And then we say, when we look at the grassroots, smaller nonprofit in our community, say, dog, why did you do business like that? Because all of our intellectual capital is sitting over there.
Right.
So we got to change that one. And I'm that's one of the things I get frustrated about when you're a foundation person, you evaluate, and I look at the board, I said, Dad, they got all of the high profile folks. And the organization over there doing some really ground tilling work, got cousin Belly and cousin Pookie, and we got all trying to make it work.
Right.
But they don't have those of us who've been part of the talented team sitting around that table. So I think taking some of our intellectual capital, and I'm not saying they got to be a whole lot, but focus it a little bit over there. Even if you just spend a little time with that nonprofit that's run by us. And we all know that it ain't an easy journey. We go other places, people treat us bad, we get mad, but we go back. Let a brother and sister mess you up. Oh, I ain't never coming back. We got to cut that out.
Right.
So I'll leave it at that. So those are my 3. So thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you so much, man. I love that. Give black. I like that. Reclaiming our coins. I want to thank all of you for being a part of this. LaDawn Sullivan, Daryl Lester, Simone Jordan, and thank you, Shea Moisture, for letting us do this panel. This has been fantastic. I could have spoken to all of you all day, and I applaud each of you for what you're doing. And I know that there's 10,000 more like you. We just didn't get a chance to do a panel discussion with them. So I applaud the work you're doing. Thank you so much for your time. This was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bless everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.